Are we all really toxic? What a word, what a description. What has gone wrong for men and their masculinity? And are we, the male of our species, in danger of being emasculated? Hello, welcome to Roundtable with me, David Foster. The dictionary definition of toxic: poisonous, venomous, virulent, noxious, dangerous, destructive, harmful, unsafe, and that's not all of it. The Me Too movement showed how women were under attack from the wrong sort of man, but that brush may have tarred pretty much all of us, perhaps unfairly.
Are men collectively being unfairly held to account for the actions of an abusive minority? A Gillette advert referencing the Me Too movement and asking if men can be better has split opinion online. Many felt that it perpetuated harmful depictions of men. It has given rise to a conversation about what it means to be a modern man. Some say the Me Too movement has increased negative perceptions. According to the American Psychological Association, men are far less likely than women to seek help for mental health problems. In the UK, men remain 3 times as likely to take their own lives than women. Do conversations about masculinity mask the struggles men face?
At the Roundtable today, we have Fernando Desouches, Managing Director of Marketing Agency New Macho. Nafeesa Zulfiqar is here. She's from St James's Place, which helps men with mental health issues. Sohaib El-Nahla is a teacher and sports coach dealing with a lot of young men, and Alexander Beiner is the co-founder of Rebel Wisdom, where men can connect and talk. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail now, if we may, Alex. This is for everybody, by the way. Why have we got to the place where we are? What are you hearing on these retreats that you organise for men?
Well, I think it's a big question, why we are where we are. I'll answer the first part first.
Yeah.
What we're hearing a lot of men talk about is that they're confused. Right now, a lot of men are confused as to what is healthy masculinity, what is the role of masculinity in the world, and what should their role be. So they're often, what we work with a lot in the workshops is this phrase we call showing up. Showing up means being very present in your life, speaking about your feelings, telling the truth, being there for your family, etc. And the reason we focus on that a lot is because what men often do is they don't show up. They retreat, they don't share how they're feeling, they kind of contract. So there is a certain contraction that we're seeing with a lot of men at the moment.
You talk to a lot of young men, Nafeesa. Are we seeing something that is new, or are we seeing something that is suddenly becoming a little bit more understood? That men are frightened of who they should be and they retreat into themselves?
I think it's a combination of both. I think certainly we have more access to services and support than we used to, so people are accessing help and therefore talking about how they're feeling and what's going on. But equally, I think it's a confusing time to be a man at the moment. There's lots of conflicting messages about what it is to be a man, and I think that's coming out in...
Whose fault is that?
Society, I think. Society. Masculinity is socially and culturally constructed, and I think it's all a bit of a mess right now.
Isn't masculinity simply about being a man?
I think masculinity...
And I don't mean that in the macho sense. I
Right.
mean that simply, you say it's a construct, a societal construct. I mean, we had no choice in it. Us men. We were men.
You're biologically men,
Yeah.
but masculinity is different to being a man, I think.
Okay, tell us what you think it is.
I think masculinity is a set of behaviours, a set of beliefs, a set of traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation over time. And there's a danger now that men are confused about what that means because they're scared about what masculinity means now. It's a confusing time.
So is that why we need your company? Or certainly New Macho?
I think
what is
so.
New Macho?
I think that the description from Nafeesa is excellent. So as it's a social issue, you need to tackle socially. So you need to tackle it from education, politics, from entertainment, media, and of course from brand communication. From brand communication, we gave a view of what it is to be a man that it was a little bit narrow and materialistic, very emotionless, in control, tough, loneliness guy. And now we've seen that that doesn't serve anymore. So we have two issues here. On one side, we have a social mandate to change that, what brands in the past has been portrayed as the successful man. And on the other, we have a commercial issue, because brands are seeing themselves that they don't connect anymore with men. And this is costly a lot of a fortune for them. So research from last year got that 69% of men don't feel represented by brands. So only in the UK you have then 15 billion pounds that are sending to the rubbish bin. So it's social and it's commercial. And now we are.
Well, what is New Macho?
New Macho is.
Don't give me the company description.
Okay.
What does it stand for?
It's my passion. It's what I'm here for. What I really believe, that we have a way to describe men and masculinity through the man up mantra, from the be tough, in control, hide your emotions, that doesn't serve any more men. So we need to find a new way. And the new way is not a new definition, it's an undefinition. The answer for me of the new is yourself. So brands, education, politics, and health need to help men to hold the space to be themselves, and that be aspirational for them, acceptable, and they can be different than others.
Anybody can jump in at any time, but I'm going to give Sohaib the first chance to speak here. You teach either in the classroom or martial arts to young people, what, from the age of 5 up to 16 or something like that. At what age, I know it's a generalization, but at what age are they starting to question, young men, their identity, their masculinity?
In my experience, I think about 8 or 9 years old, they start to form different behaviors to the academic peers, and they start to sort of try to establish themselves more as boys, and they may even push back on some behaviors that they don't feel are in line with that, basically.
In what sense?
Well, we've had a few issues in school, for example, when we differentiate for students, so we have students put in different groups. If there's a majority female group and there's a boy sitting on that table, he might express something like, but I'm a boy, why am I here, that kind of thing, not realizing, why he's there.
For me, education is key. So I really like what Nafeesa is doing on really helping the issues and the symptoms that we have now. But for me, it's time for prevention. It's time for education, what the two of the guys are doing in different ways to be a man. Open the discussion. For me and for New Macho, to be honest, the end goal of this journey is a sustainable gender balance, where men and women have healthy masculinity and femininity and can coexist. The thing is, we need to recognize that we have been discussing issues for women for more than 100 years, issues for different sexual genders for many years already, and now we realize that men were sick in some way, that they are not at their best. And we talk only about the symptoms. We talk about suicide, we talk about anxiety, we talk about addictions, we talk about other stuff, but we are on depression, but we are not talking much about, okay, then what is the source of the crisis and how we help that to prevent that crisis? And education for me is key.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Alex, when people come to you, are they all desperate or are they just inquisitive?
They're certainly not all desperate. I'd say a lot of people are just curious. They're curious to explore what does it mean for me personally, as in for each individual, to be a man. So what we do is I kind of echo what Fernando is talking about. It's not talking, we don't try and put across a certain idea of masculinity. We give people the opportunity to explore what is it for me to be a man. However, and this is where it gets a little bit complex, there are certain things that we as men share. There are certain experiences we share, and there are certain ways of being that we share. I disagree somewhat with the idea that masculinity is entirely socially constructed. I think it is certainly in large part socially constructed. However, there is a biological reality to being a man that needs to also be
That's a much better way of putting it than the way I put it, yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so it's a yes and rather than an either or. We're relatively blank slates, but we're not completely blank.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think different men have different temperaments. I think we do recognize that, and there needs to be room for flexibility for growth. And I do like that customized individual approach where people can explore their own masculinity and also look at it in a more comprehensive way. However, I would agree that masculinity isn't entirely socially constructed. There's definitely certain things that we can't choose and that we need some guidance on.
What is it that the young men are frightened of?
I'm not quite sure. I think that there's a few different elements that come together. One is sort of dealing with psychological, emotional questions that they have. Things like tackling anxiety, depression, not realizing that this might be normal, part of a cyclical sort of experience. Other things could just be social pressures, sort of peer pressure. Might be pressure to present themselves in a certain way, dress in a certain way, make a certain amount of money, that type of thing.
Because I'm trying to work out whether this is new or whether it's been around for a long time and simply been suppressed.
Well, I think definitely in times of socio-economic crisis, there's a sort of an increase in mental instability and emotional instability among men. So I was looking at a recent study where I think during the Great Depression, there was a tendency for men to take their own lives more frequently. So I think that things like an increase in depression and suicide are linked to society.
Yeah, but it's also another question whether we are living in major socio-economic crisis times, because actually in many ways, to echo Harold Macmillan, people these days, in terms of their worldly possessions and the path through life, have never had it so good. So what do you, are you going to say something?
Just,
and then
no, you go first, please.
I was going to say, with regard to suicide statistics, so there's over 5,000 suicides in the UK and Wales. 3/4 of those are men. I think you said that in the intro. But interestingly, the highest rates of suicide are amongst low-skilled male workers and men within those sort of professions. So I think that's quite interesting that whilst I understand, compared to maybe the Great Depression, we are economically in a much better position.
we are.
Those people still probably aren't earning enough to...
But equally, it could be because they're being told by all these people on Facebook who have perfect lives and other social media things that they realise their life isn't perfect. That is for another day, although it's an element of this discussion.
No, it's a total element. It's not minor. And we have done a new Macho survey in the UK, and we realized that the pressure on social media is more in men than women. We have a statistic for that, surprisingly, and more for millennial than any other generation. So I think suicide is one of the subjects, but also you have anxiety, you have opioids. So there is the world is changing in many things for good. So men that used to have most the power and all of the works now are realizing that on one part they are competing with more women, which is totally fine, but they don't know then how to play, what to act, and also that the playbook that served them in the past now, okay, it's been challenged. So what they need, a new thing. And they are looking outside. They are giving their power away. They say, okay, tell me, society, people, my boss, tell me what I have to do, who I am, who am I? Well, no, exactly that. You need to move
But
from
there
that.
is no answer. That's the point, isn't it? That was the point that you're making, Alex. People have to look inside themselves, not at other people necessarily, to find the way.
Yes, but in a sense, culture also, we used to have rites of passage, for example, for men and women. And a rite of passage would be this process that a young man would go on, or a young woman, but just talk about men. They would go on, and that, they would test themselves, and through that process, they would know they were no longer a boy, they were now a man. And being a man in a tribe, you had a very clear purpose, and you had a very clear direction. So a lot of people have pointed
It
out...
was things like killing your first lion, wasn't it?
Yes, in the extreme,
yeah.
But Warren Farrell, who is an author whose latest book is called The Boy Crisis, he has pointed out that there's also a purpose crisis amongst men. So this crisis in purpose and meaning of what direction do I go in, what is my role in society, I think that plays a huge role. So we might be better off materially, but a crisis of meaning is a big deal in terms of how it affects our mental health.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, carry on. But so, given that, what can you teach these young men? What can
we
you
need to
show
teach them about wellness as a more holistic concept, that it's not a matter of just physical wellness, it's mental wellness, spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, making the right dietary choices, making the right exercise choices, making the right social choices. So we're trying to teach children a more comprehensive understanding, including things like mindfulness and other tools that maybe fell off or that we've lost over the years. I think that societies of old had these tools available to them and maybe practice sort of different types of ceremonial activities, I think similar to something that Alex works with. Maybe some sort of collective practices that help to rebalance people. But at the moment, everything's sort of fallen off.
There was a guy called Connell, I think, who wrote about the alternative title for this. It's called Hegemonic Masculinity, and said it's built on 2 legs, domination of women, and a hierarchy of inter-male dominance. In other words, puffing your chest out, subjugating not just women, but men as well. And I'm wondering how you say to young men, listen, it's no longer right for you to bang your chest, to impose yourself on other people in this way, without sort of emasculating them.
I don't think masculinity is connected with subjugating people necessarily. I think there's...
How do you say this to them, though? I mean, I agree with
Well,
you. How do you go about teaching them this?
I mean, we teach them to focus on merit basically, meritocratic environment. So we try to run sports activities that are mixed. We focus on people that perform well in a sporting context without any particular emphasis on gender. Sometimes, you know, there's a bit of questioning about that. So sometimes boys will feel like because they're boys that they have to win the race or things like this. But for me, I think masculinity was more about protection of women historically rather than, you know, systematically subjugating them.
Where did it come from, all of this? Because I was struck by something that you told our producer, of course I can't find my notes now, about men being frightened now of women.
Men being frightened of women, that would be fun, wouldn't it?
I'll find it in a second.
Yeah, find it. I don't know if men are frightened of women. I think certainly the Me Too movement has meant that some men, not all men, are scared of how they're coming across and how they're behaving, and that's right, because how they're behaving was incorrect.
I perhaps put 2 things together wrongly. This is what you told our producer. Post the rise of the Me Too movement, which was mostly led by women, so let's allow for that, there is definitely a sense of fear amongst men. Not that men are frightened of women, but Me Too has made men more frightened.
Yeah, certainly.
Why?
I've had conversations with men where they're saying, if I see a woman that I find attractive walking down the street, that, you know, why can't I approach her and ask her for her number or tell her that she's beautiful? And that because of the Me Too movement, they feel that they'll be stigmatized or they'll be sort of called names for doing that. And actually, that's a beautiful social interaction that happens in the world. So I think those sorts of interactions are possibly threatened.
What do you say to people who tell you that?
I think if, even, you know, in the olden times, as we keep talking about, in the olden times, if a woman found a man attractive, she'd drop her handkerchief as she walked past. There's some sort of signal that you're allowed to approach me. I think if a woman is walking down the street...
Called the come on, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. There are subtleties and nuances where you can tell if a woman is interested in engaging in some sort of conversation with you. But if a woman who is attractive is walking down the street and she has given you no indication that she's interested in talking to you, why, just because you're a man and you find her attractive, do you have the right to approach her?
Well, because you might think that she's just shy.
Well, maybe she is, maybe she isn't, but she shouldn't be forced to be subjected to...
But do you think Me Too has damaged?
I think there are some men who now are scared to approach women, certainly, but overall, I think the Me Too movement has scared men that needed to be scared, and those are the men that behaved in aggressive and abusive ways towards women.
There's also a study that came out of Colorado recently where I think male paramedics expressed concern about giving CPR to women patients in the rise of Me Too. So I know that it's affected men approaching women, but I think it might touch other aspects that might not be so.
Beware what doors you open when you think you're opening one that is all for the right reasons. You don't know quite what's behind it, do you?
Yeah, I think so. I was in New York last year and they asked me openly that. They asked me actually if it was okay to open the door for a woman, and I want to tell you what they answered. But for me, my answer was more open about the Me Too movement. The Me Too is a double-edged sword for me. On one side, putting over the table something that is super important, people that were abusing of power, and this is very wrong, and some of them are even criminal. But on the other side, it's very risky if we put an enemy where the enemy is not. That is in every man, because most of men I know are are nice people and we need each other. This is why I go back to sustainable gender balance. So we need to give men the possibility, and this is part of the work we should be doing, of increase their emotional intelligence. This is what for me education is super good. I know if I have to, so I open the door to a woman because it's good for me. So I am there, this is my value. I will open the door. If you are angry because I open the door for you, well, maybe you are giving your power away.
Yeah, I open a door for a woman as a matter of course. My father told me it was the right thing to do. I have to say I have never ever had anybody get across. The majority of the reactions are, well, thank you very much indeed.
I mean, we teach children at school age that they should open doors for everyone,
Yeah,
in
for
both
each other.
genders. So
Yeah.
it's something that is socializing them early on. I think men learn a lot by observing. And I think that if we, want to have good examples out there, that we need to focus on that as well, maybe elevate that.
Can I read you something from Psychology Today? It says there's been a relentless ideological attack on masculinity stemming from radical feminism. The most recent example of which is toxic masculinity. It seeks to pathologize masculinity in ways that are profoundly harmful to the existential sense of self of young men. I don't disagree with that, but what I wonder is, are we navel-gazing just a little bit too much? Because a little bit like self-leveling cement, if you put it down it will find its own level, like water it will find its own level. Whereas if you actually try and work at it too hard, to push the water into a corner, it's up to us as individuals to find out where we stand, isn't it? Just on the basis of decency. We all need to ease off a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a...
You see that? After you, how polite. That was wonderful. No, after you.
I would say that I think most balanced people that have been educated properly have some understanding of appropriate ways of approaching and speaking to someone, and ways that are not so appropriate. So I think when I get asked about this, I usually say that the acid test for it is how you communicate what you've done. So I think if you go and approach a group of your peers and you mention that you spoke to someone on a train earlier, I don't think they will bat an eyelid at that. But if you mention that you've sort of crossed the line or wolf whistle, maybe abused someone, people would react in shock and horror at that, So I don't think we're promoting this type of sort of like toxic masculinity between ourselves, although there's a minority within a minority of people that, as Fernando said, are basically indulging in criminal behavior.
Yeah, it's simply about respect for one another, isn't it? And we should teach men, young men, that not to be afraid of showing respect for one another.
And one thing there on toxic masculinity I want you to say is men and women has masculinity and femininity. So I think in my career, I used to work for companies, many times women acting with what we call now toxic masculinity. So we need to understand that and try to heal masculinity for both sexes.
Alex, you say what's needed is, I think it's mature masculinity.
Yeah, it's
Define
actually it's the point I was about to make from the quote you read. So I think the quote you read, and I think it's largely true, there's a pathologizing of masculinity in general, in certain spheres, not everywhere. But the effect that has is culturally making people think that there's something inherently wrong with masculinity and there needs to be less of it somehow. What I've seen in our retreats and talking to lots of men is that the opposite is true. We need more masculinity. It's more mature masculinity. So very often when men act out, or when people act out, but when men act out particularly in an abusive way, it can very often be because there's an aspect of themselves they're not connected to. There's some kind of shadow side of themselves, and they're suppressing it, and they need to work on themselves, and we call it coming out sideways. So they're trying to get their validation from the world from the outside instead of from within. And that requires a mature approach to oneself, and it requires doing it in a group with one another and in a community. And all of that, especially when men get together in a group, a very mature masculinity comes out.
Do you think, with all the young men that you talk to, that we are going to find a way of sorting this out, or is the problem only ever going to get worse?
No, I think definitely things are changing. I think men now are seeking help. I think they are accessing retreats like you're talking about. They're accessing James's Place, which is a suicide centre. So I think things are changing, absolutely.
Okay. And we need help from all round. We need exposure for this, don't we? We need to talk about it.
We are talking.
As much as we talked about Me Too and the damage that
Yeah,
caused, we need to talk as we are today.
Exactly. I don't think we should blame men or blame women. I think Fernando's right.
I started working on this in 2013, working for the Lynx brand. At the moment, nobody were talking about masculinity.
This is the one that young men spray everywhere, not
That
just
one.
under their arms, but on their hair everywhere.
That one.
Yeah?
But despite that,
And I won't say what I think it smells like, but there we are.
well, despite that, what was important there is that from that moment, end of 2013, beginning of 2014 to now we are talking about it. And the best way to sort it out is talking about it.
Okay, so perhaps, and thank you, listen, we've come to the end of the programme, it's gone so incredibly fast. Perhaps what we've had is a clash of two groups of people who didn't know precisely where they stood. On the one hand, it might be the Me Too movement. On the other hand, it might be men who don't know their position. Banged head on, and now everybody's sitting back, taking a deep breath and saying, look, this isn't right. You know, we need to sort something out. Perhaps. And certainly one way of doing that is to talk about it, as we have done here on Roundtable. Listen, thank you very, very much indeed for coming in. It's difficult to know how to approach a problem like this, but I think you've certainly enlightened me, and I hope you feel enlightened at home as well, or wherever you happen to be watching this programme. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, we hope to have your company next time. Goodbye for now.